Welcome to this flight of the Retail Pilot. I'm Ken Pilot, former CEO and current brand advisor, investor, and board member. I'm thrilled to share with you some of the insights from retail's leaders and legends, as well as my perspective on retail today. This podcast is sponsored by the following. PredictSpring is a global point-of-sale platform live in 22 countries. The platform includes mobile POS, endless aisle, fulfillment, inventory management, and clienteling, creating a true omni experience for customers and associates. PredictSpring powers Suit Supply, Converse, Lovesac, Decium, Janie and Jack, and Bouclair. So on this pre-flight with Jan Kniffen, we're going to touch on AI because there is no more important piece of technology within retail or in the world than AI. Jan, how are you seeing AI? And specifically, where are you seeing AI being used by retailers and or brands to improve their business?
I'm going to say what I always say when I start talking about AI. So some of your listeners have probably heard this before, but I am a true believer. So if you're not a true believer, you have to take what I say with a grain of salt. But I've been reading science fiction since I learned to read at 3, and I still read science fiction. I have been waiting for general artificial intelligence for my whole life. And I think we'll soon have machines that are either sentient or that we can't tell are not sentient by talking to them. Do I think that will change everything, including retailing? Yes. If you think the rise of the agrarian society was a big deal, and if you think the rise of the city-state was a big deal, or the Industrial Revolution was a big deal, you ain't seen nothing yet. AI will either kill us or create the post-scarcity society for the first time in mankind's history. So hang on to your hat. But as retailing in particular, it will completely change retailing. And if you can't afford to invest in it as a retailer, you are going to be in very big trouble. You know, already we're going to see 15,000 stores close this year, probably. We're only going to see 5,000 open. That would be the biggest closing out of a non-recession period ever. So we're already seeing pressure out there from people who can't afford to invest in technology. AI is an expensive technology. So when we're looking at it, a lot of us are looking at AI agents right now, right? Either for the company or a general AI agent. And we start with the idea that the consumer wants a seamless experience online as well as offline in all shopping formats. They want features like convenience, fast shipping, fast trips to the store. They want easy get in and out. Nothing is out of stock. They can use their preferred payment method. They want information richness, touch, feel, fit, size. They want to know what the customer said. They want to know what the alternatives are. They also want to know pricing difference between you and your competitor. And they really want to know the best place to find the product and the best way to get it. They want fast, friendly, accurate answers to questions from sales associates or customer service agents. And they want to be curated, the experience, just for them. They don't want to see irrelevant items in store. So why do they have to see irrelevant items when they go browse at, say, Amazon? Because I see a million when I go browse at Amazon. They want it to be easy to find what they're looking for. They want to be inspired. This is not rocket science. This is just retailing. Now with AI, we have a way to do all of that. John Wanamaker did that 150 years ago personally. They could only do it in one store. And even that became overwhelming as it got bigger. Now we can replicate John Wanamaker and his personal service 1 billion times over with an AI agent. And maybe with DeepSeek, we can actually afford to do it. It'll be interesting to see if that changes the game or if that's really just a deep fake, because we don't know yet.
I think you'll only be able to use that when shopping at Uniqlo. I'm just, call me crazy.
I'm suspicious too. But anyway, AI is accelerating this whole omnichannel trend thing, right? That's like some of these features are more traditionally associated with online shopping, some with in-store shopping. But even before AI, retailers were using technology tools to get the best stuff to the customers across all the shopping formats. And AI we can get it right now. Makes it so much easier.
Yeah, I think to your point, I think probably the biggest change we're going to see is the improvement of search. And it's going to be conversational. It's natural language. I'm just going to be able to talk my way through an online experience and have things appear that I really want versus trying to use caveman-like search terms, shirt, coat, boot, pant, and hope I find things that I want. Now I could say, I'm looking for something cool to wear. I'm going to the following restaurant with these people. What does it need? What should I wear? And I should be able to see an entire outfit that looks right.
Now you're to the part that's the scariest, because the customer has to like what I tell them enough to pay for it, right? Because the bottleneck's really the customer. Is it the customer's desire or is it the price? If it's price, AI is going to fix that. If it's the customer's desire or willingness to play the game with us, that's a bigger problem. So are you willing to tell us, that you're a Republican or a Democrat, that you're old or you're young, that you're conservative or liberal, that you're skinny or fat or somewhere in between? Do you have blue eyes or brown eyes, dark hair or light hair, no hair at all? Do you have dogs and cats? Are you urban or rural? Are you willing to stand in front of the camera, either in your tightest clothes or no clothes at all, and let us build your avatar so that we can get the clothes just right on you? Do you want your face on that avatar so it looks like you? Or do you want it cut off at the neck so you don't have to see the face? It depends on whether you're young or old, how you feel about all that. And if they won't do it, we can't do it.
Right. You and I would agree, though, Jen, as the customer gets older, I think the resistance to giving out information is going to get much lower. It's that my kids don't care. They're 23, they're 32. They're like, make my experience better online. Here you go. Here's my credit card. Take it out there and walk through the steps for me. So I think that'll just continue to improve. I think the online experience will get better. And I'll be curious to see how you take some of these AI solutions and bring them into store. I still don't understand how, with what's happening with search and outfitting and completing looks, I can't go to a sales associate and say, hey, I found this jacket. Show me 4 things that work with it, and get an immediate answer. And they have the ability online to do it, but they're not doing that yet in stores. So AI's got to make its move into stores. We're still doing 75% of our business in stores. That's where the rubber's really meeting the road. Let's take our learnings from online and bring them in store. That's what I say. But like you, I'm excited about where AI is going. And if you're not on that train, you're dead in the water. With that, we'll end this pre-flight. Thanks, Jan. Appreciate it as always. Welcome back to the Retail Pilot. I am here today with founding members of Red Antler. Emily Heyward is the co-founder and chief brand officer of Red Antler, where she has revolutionized modern brand building. Since 2007, she has helped establish some of the most iconic brands of the 21st century, including Allbirds, Casper, Hinge, Pop-Up Bagels, and Figure. Her influence extends to legacy organizations like the NBA, Sonos, Zillow, and demonstrating her ability to drive obsession for businesses of any size. Emily is also a partner at Habitat Partners, an early-stage venture fund, and the author of Obsessed, Building a Brand People Love from Day One. She has been recognized as one of Inc.'s most important entrepreneurs of the past decade and Entrepreneur's most powerful women in business. JB Osborne is the co-founder and CEO of Red Antler, where his strategic vision has transformed the agency into the leading creative partner for brand invention and reinvention. Under his leadership, Red Antler was named one of Fast Company's most innovative companies. JB has been recognized by Inc. as one of the most important entrepreneurs of the past decade for redefining how brands engage with consumers in a rapidly evolving world. And he is also a partner at Habitat Partners. Emily and JB, a pleasure to have you on the flight.
So happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Ken.
JB and I go back a ways. I know that you were very instrumental and close to the Burrow guys who I was an investor in, so I'll come clean. So we have a bit of history, good history, I might add.
Yeah, I remember when we first met at a dinner at their pop-up in Soho many years ago.
That was a fun time. So you guys have built some incredible brands like Supergoop, Levain, Pop-Up Bagels, Casper, Burrow, Can, Happy Wolf, and Bezzy. What would you consider your secret sauce for branding? Emily, you want to take a stab at that?
Absolutely. Well, I'm about to reveal the secret sauce and it's not that complicated. So maybe we're giving away too much. But I think what it really boils down to is having an unbelievable amount of empathy for the people that we're ultimately trying to reach, which are consumers. And every time we're working with a new brand, whether it's a startup that we're helping launch from scratch or an existing business, in the case of Levain, when they came to us, they'd been around 25 years. we start by really thinking about who is this business for? Why does it need to exist? What is it going to ultimately give people? What problem is it solving for them? And how do we make sure that that core purpose is evident in every creative choice that we make? So, of course, there's a ton of innovation and creativity that goes into this process as well. You start with strategy, but it certainly doesn't end there. But I think that when we're making creative choices, it's never about what do we think is cool or what's on trend or, how do we just like broadly reach Gen Z or whatever it else might be that people are thinking about at the moment. It's really about being unbelievably intentional about telling a story that's going to connect to people and ultimately inspire them to want the brand to be a part of their own identity.
JB, when brands that you have worked with come to you, where are they in their journey? They have a name, don't have a name, they have a concept. How early do brands come to you, Red Antler, for help?
We see an incredible spectrum. I think one of the things that I'm really passionate about with our business is how we get to work with businesses that are at the absolute earliest moments, and then also work with leading global companies that are operating at a massive scale. And it's everything across that spectrum. But for the early stage businesses, quite often we're meeting teams who are at the idea stage. They're on a path to raising capital if they haven't raised some initial, pre-seed or seed money. I think when we're having those conversations, because we often get the question of like, when is it too early or when does it make sense to think about brand or partnering with Red Antler? And our perspective on that is, while it can vary a bit category to category, generally speaking, if a business has a clear idea of, what they want to own in the market in terms of like the idea, the positioning, the change they want to create, what they want to anchor their brand on in terms of like, an overarching idea, then we can do what we do successfully. And we really love working with businesses that are at that foundational moment. And I think have so much experience working as partners to entrepreneurs to help them navigate the journey that is launching a business. I think we built our business helping to launch businesses and are just incredibly passionate about all aspects of that journey and wind up finding ways to add value, support, advise beyond the work that we're being tasked with delivering in that partnership. And I think Emily and I both have a tremendous amount of passion for that. And looking back on all the work that we've done, I think something that is just so incredibly rewarding is being able to like watch those entrepreneurial journeys unfold and having countless examples of like, oh, well, remember back when we met and had this idea to launch a new thing, and you do the fast forward to just incredible impact on various categories and industries, and then seeing those personal journeys unfold as well.
Some of the brands that I'm most familiar with that you've helped launch would include Allbirds, Casper, Burrow. Did all of those brands have a name when they came to see you, or was that part of the process of the branding journey?
None of them had a name when they came to see us. Casper, actually, they had come up with that name on their own, but we had to really help them dig through a list of hundreds of names that they were circling around and considering and really guide them to that decision. And with Burrow and Allbirds, we help them create the names.
Is there a common denominator in building a brand that you find or are challenged with that most often either helps in the success of building it or slows the process down?
I think one variable that can impact the success and definitely impacts process is what's critical to being successful in building a brand is doing something that is true and unique and cuts through. And I think founders of early stage companies, leaders of established businesses, a tension that always exists is that desire to do something unique, but the fear or caution of wanting to fit in or follow what's already happening in the market, looking at trends, looking at what competition is doing. And so I think we always are in this position of having to help companies figure out where they need to be brave, how they need to be brave, and what is required to truly cut through, start a conversation, create intrigue. We've been in the position of helping companies that are oftentimes against really challenging odds. They have a very small amount of money, a runway to get traction, and often incumbent businesses they're competing with. And I think if you're not coming out and saying something unique, showing up in a way that's unexpected, it's far harder to succeed. And so I think we're in that position of helping companies ensure that they're being strategic, developing a point of view, and then following through. And so often the process is trying to come back to that strategy and saying, but remember, like, this is why we're doing this. We have to ensure we bring this to life. Like, we need to follow through and do something that ultimately is compelling and meaningful and gets consumers to feel something.
Within that, when working with brands, and I think a few of the brands that I named, they all started with at least multiple CEOs or two team leaders. Does that become more complex as you're trying to appeal to two people rather than one when building a brand?
I mean, I think that anytime we're working with founders, that piece of the puzzle is infinitely simpler than when we're working with larger, more established businesses. You know, even if you've got two co-founders and both are incredibly opinionated, the good news is they're both in the room. They're both engaged in the process. You know, they recognize how important this is to their ultimate success. I think where stakeholders get very difficult to manage is when we're like moving through levels of an organization and the people who are the ultimate decision makers are not along for the ride. And that is something that we always try to caution against at the start of a project with a larger organization, is that ultimately, if you want this work to be as strong as it can be, I actually call it corporate chutes and ladders, where you're like moving through steps and everything seems to be fine. And then you get to the top and you get like bumped back down to the bottom. And that's a surefire recipe for watering down the work.
How would you say, when you think about the branding space, brands are best able to reach their consumer today? It seems so challenging. What were some of the campaigns that you put through early on that you found to be most successful? And then what can brands do today to connect with their customer?
I mean, I think that the most critical recipe is to not think that there is some universal recipe. Like, I think that there is not a list of tactics that if you employ these correctly, you're going to be successful. I think the brands that are able to connect with people today, when it's so crowded, so expensive, the competition is staggering on all sides, are figuring out like what they can uniquely say and where they can uniquely be. And there's not a formula. And if you think you're going to find some magic playbook that someone else has done and you're going to copy it and be equally successful, that I think is a huge mistake.
Hey, Emily, you've identified in your book, you focused on Coca-Cola and Nike and Apple and what made them successful, that emotional connection with the customer. JB, as you've worked with brands, which brand do you think made one of the strongest emotional connections with customers?
I really love the work that our team has done with Hinge. And speaking of emotional connection, it's an incredibly emotional category, the dating app space. And I think, successful work has to be rooted in a consumer truth and a product truth. And bringing those two things together is where the magic happens. And to what Emily was sharing, it's less about tactics or channels. And I think it's more about saying something true and doing it a unique way. And the work we did with Hinge started as a brand evolution and was in reaction to their team wanting to carve unique space and really build an app that was all about finding true connection, finding a relationship, and wasn't about swipes and hookups. And that brand work, which, helped inspire their team to evolve the product experience itself, then a couple years later led to campaign work. And that campaign, the line in the campaign, the core idea was designed to be deleted. And I think the emotional connection there was all about just kind of acknowledging for the end user that true success was like not having to be on a dating app. And deleting the app meant that it worked. And I think there's like an emotional recognition and honesty in that really resonated with consumers. And, the app had a anthropomorphized app icon, Hingy, who died many deaths when people found love. And I love the feeling that work gives you and sort of the wink and the nod and how you feel like you're kind of a part of the joke. And it's been incredibly successful for their business.
I've experienced a number of the brands you've worked on, obviously, like the ones I mentioned before. I was about to download Hinge and, then I realized my wife sometimes sees my phone. Our phones are similar. So I just decided to do a little more field research rather than download the app because I thought my story might be a bit thin saying it was investigative for a podcast, but clearly know many people who are on it who have done well by it and are no longer using it. So well done on that front. Few brands that we've mentioned have faced a number of challenges. I mean, you take a look at what's happened with Allbirds, you take a look at what's happened with Casper. From your perspective, and not sure how long you work with them, certainly you're very important at the launch, but from your perspective, what happened there? Where did they lose track or lose their mojo?
I think the core challenge is one of like the capital structure of those businesses. Like, I don't think that there were brand challenges necessarily at play. It was more about a moment in time when technology investors were investing in consumer businesses and investing in valuations that were near impossible to achieve for a retail company. And that led to a dynamic where, the kind of promises made to raise capital and what would need to be achieved from a business standpoint was not feasible to be achieved. And the companies were being encouraged by those investors to grow at all costs. And so money was being used to acquire customers, but not necessarily in a profitable fashion. And that created an equation that was just incredibly messy. And then the market sentiment shifted and investors decided that profitability was the objective. And that's really challenging when you've built the mechanics of your business to be focused on customer acquisition and spending money to grow and focus on top line growth versus focusing on profitability. And that led a number of brands to be in a really tough spot. And we saw, not necessarily with those particular businesses, but other companies behind the scenes conversations where the investors who were supporting those businesses, setting the objective, like demanding that they grow, then showed up another day and said, well, now you need to be profitable. And if you need more money, here are the terms, how you're going to get it, and like completely crunch the cap tables. And so we've been through a challenging, messy period, but I feel like we're through that. And there's been some challenging stories along the way, but it's instilled in companies a very different philosophy of like what healthy growth looks like. And there's a far greater focus on profitability and sustainable growth, which I think is exciting and encouraging. And it definitely feels like a new era in the consumer landscape.
Emily, do you have a favorite campaign that you've worked on? A favorite team you've worked with and helped build the brand?
I genuinely feel like that's when you ask a parent who their favorite child
I
is.
am. You got to have one. We all do. Wait, I mean, we don't. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. I am the absolute queen of drinking the Kool-Aid of everything we work on. Like whatever I'm working on, I pour myself into it so wholeheartedly. I believe so deeply in the business and it becomes like my new favorite brand. So every time I get asked this, it's recency bias. It's like, what did I work on most recently? I think right now we're all so excited about the trajectory of pop-up bagels. That's been a really fun one. I think it's a category where it feels like what's going to be new in bagels and what pop-up has been able to achieve in the hands of their amazing founder, Adam, has just been remarkable to see. And they're on like such a tear and they're just delicious. So like what's not to like about a bagel brand? So right now pop-up's very near and dear to my heart, but like ask me in a month and it will absolutely be, the next thing.
When building a brand, and then I want to transition to rebranding a brand because I think they're quite different. But when building a brand, what are just some of the key ingredients? What's on that checklist of things that a brand needs to do to be prepared to go forward?
I think that it starts with clarity about who your core audience is. And that is not the same thing as like, who is everyone we will ever want to sell to? That's a mistake I see a lot of entrepreneurs make where they want to be huge. So from the beginning, they're trying to be everything to everyone. And I think it's really important to have that focus in the early days and think about who's going to love you most, who's going to be your most loyal, ardent follower out of the gate, because those people are going to be so essential in helping you reach that next stage of success. Then I think it's figuring out like, what can you uniquely offer that core audience? What do you bring to the table that no one else does? And then figuring out how to tell that story in a way that feels brave and exciting. JB mentioned this before. I think that there's a moment when you do need to operate based on gut, throw caution to the wind a little bit, believe that you have the right foundation in place, and recognize that people are, seeing so much these days, and you really need to work all the harder to stand out and be the thing that people remember tomorrow.
JB, when you began working with brands, and this goes back a number of years, in addition to getting fees from brands, Red Antler took equity. You took a position. How has that led to your current day with Habitat and what you're doing? I mean, in a sense, you were creating a fund back when, and now you actually have a fund, Habitat. Love to hear a little bit more about the fund. But first, just tell us, why did you take equity? That seemed to be a pretty unique thing to do from what I recall when you started it.
It was born out of necessity in many regards because we wanted to work with the founders and the businesses that we were most excited about. And I think in starting Red Antler, Emily and I were incredibly excited about being a part of what's next and working with the teams that we believed in. And oftentimes they had limited cash budgets and huge aspirations. And so our solution to that was to structure relationships where we got paid the cash they could afford to pay us, and we would take equity alongside that. And, there was a financial reality that led to that dynamic, but I think we realized very early on that there was a relationship dynamic as well. And when you're working with teams that are under incredible pressure, trying to move fast, oftentimes had never built a brand before, it was really helpful to have a dynamic where we had shared incentive and we were able to operate, from the same perspective where we wanted what they wanted and we could talk about things in that way. And I think that allowed us to have the hard conversations when we needed to and to discuss a shared vision of where the brand needed to go. And so it started with making those sweat equity investments. And one of the things that was unique about us is we thought about it as a portfolio from the early days. So while we were not a venture fund, we were building a venture portfolio and thinking about the relationships we were building to drive deal flow and seeing the best companies. And I think a big part of our success is our passion for working with the most amazing teams and the most amazing businesses. And all of those things really fuel each other. And so we spent many years building the flow of seeing incredible companies, making sweat equity bets, and then started experimenting with balance sheet investing in 2019 and wrote small checks into a number of businesses just to see what that dynamic would be like. And then in 2022, decided to raise a dedicated fund. So Habitat Partners is separate from Red Antler, lives alongside the operating business, but we have outside LPs. We raised about $31 million to invest pre-seed and seed. And we have incredible partners in that fund, Blake Line and Daniel Fairman, who helped to run that business. And it's been really fun to sort of see the evolution and the sort of the shape of what we're doing evolve, but the intention and the passion behind it remains the same. And it just gives us new ways that we can support founders and the ecosystem. And Habitat Partners, we often get the question sort of what is the strategy behind that fund? And are we only investing in Red Antler clients? And it's been interesting that, probably half the companies that we've invested in have some sort of commercial relationship with Red Antler. So Red Antler is definitely a way that we are meeting businesses and seeing opportunity, but it's only part of the equation. And we're able to invest and support companies just through our ecosystem, through founders that we know, investors who are tapping us to come in as a strategic partner and build a really interesting, diverse set of portfolio companies for the fund.
There's also a fairly large tech component to your fund. I was looking at some of the investments made. Who's the techie on the team?
Well, I think we're all just techie enough. We live in this, I think something I love about Red Antler, and Emily and I got our start working in, consumer packaged goods advertising. So very squarely in the world of consumer. But through the years, the work that we're doing has always evolved based on where innovation's happening and where investment is flowing. And so, that's taken us into many categories. Lately, there's a ton of interesting stuff happening in the world of AI, of course. But we're seeing businesses across the spectrum from, consumer product, food, beauty, to really interesting software companies that are helping to support those businesses. So we've been investing in software companies that help support the consumer ecosystem. And, we're able to be helpful to those businesses because we have, a whole collection of founders and companies that we know that we can make introductions to, retailers that we've built relationships with. And so we think about it through the lens of investing in companies where we can find some way to be helpful. And that takes different shapes and sizes based on the type of business. But we want to be able to be a value add investor, not just another check on a cap table. And, investing in software companies is a way for us to provide value to companies that are in our network brand side and vice versa. And so, yeah, it's been a mix of consumer businesses, B2B SaaS companies, and then also some sort of exciting future of technology businesses like Figure in humanoid robotics.
Yeah, I was looking at the portfolio, recognized quite a few companies in there. You have Black Crow and Deer. I know those founders. Curious, with investing in technology specifically, and now, as you mentioned, AI, how is technology being used relative to your new customers? Is that part of why customers are coming to you? Obviously, there's a creative bent, but the fact that you have this tech infrastructure, if you will, or tech background or tech team behind you, does that position you better for new work that needs to be done?
I think that we've had an approach where something we felt strongly about from the beginning was not being category experts. And what I mean by that is not having like one thing we did. There's certain creative partners that have a category expertise and like they only do a certain type of work. And our approach has always been about diversification and working across so many different categories. And our perspective is that learning from one category and applying to another is a really successful way to find fresh perspectives and to be able to come into a space, be it a new food business or a software company. And instead of thinking that you have a playbook or a way of doing things, instead looking at the landscape, thinking about what currently exists, what would be required to cut through and start a new conversation and bring that fresh perspective and the wealth of knowledge from working on so many different other types of businesses. So, I think that at any moment, we're working on a number of businesses that are incredibly technical. And I think we're in a moment right now where those technical companies are getting more and more specific, complex, niche. Like the pace of innovation is just increasing. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we're working on a new beauty business, a new food business, where technology might be critical in the operations of those companies, but in the core product, really, it's not about technology. It's about an incredible consumer experience and delivering a great product. And I think we are able to be equally excited about all of those things. And that makes us a great partner because we're always coming to the table thinking about what is necessary for your success, regardless of category, and how can we take learnings and apply them to figure out a fresh approach.
I also think incredible amount of overlap and the lines are increasingly blurred. And I think the idea of tech as a category is going to eventually just go away because everything is tech. We're seeing incredibly advanced sort of frontier tech companies that are looking to form connections with consumers, even though in this current day, there's absolutely no consumer application for what they're building. And then on the flip side, JB brought up beauty. I'm working on a skincare brand right now that's employing like some of the most advanced science that's ever been used in a consumer product. And part of our challenge is how we tell that story without requiring the average person who's buying the skincare to like whip out a textbook. So, I do believe that the skills really do translate and that cross-pollination makes all of our work stronger.
Also, to emphasize the work that you do, let's talk a little bit about some of the rebrands you've done, because JB, as you said, it's just not all about the startups and early stage, but you've worked across industries. I know that you've worked with Ramp, which is a real leader in the, call them fintech, in the finance space. But talk a little bit, Emily, if you would, about some of the rebrands that you've done, because I would assume those are a bit more challenging. Those are brands that are distressed, they've lost their way, and they're coming to you for a restart.
Yeah, I think just to clarify, we're not always coming in moments of distress. I think that, certainly in the case of Ramp, they were doing phenomenally well when they came to us. And the reason why they wanted to evolve their brand was actually because they saw so much more potential ahead of them. But you are absolutely right that there's always a problem that needs to be solved. And typically that problem is that for whatever reason, the brand that is currently in place is not set up to take the business to its next stage of growth. So often it's that the brand doesn't tell the full story, or they've had competitors who have caught up or surpassed them, at least in how they look and speak, if not in the product themselves. So we're coming in, and I think that the trickiest part of a rebrand is that you want to honor the legacy of what's gotten them to where they are today. Like, you're very rarely wiping the slate clean. I think in most cases that would be highly irresponsible. And instead, it's about figuring out what is the equity that we need to preserve, and then how do we build on top of that to make sure that we are moving the needle and that we're not just making tiny incremental changes that might feel like a really big deal internally, but at the end of the day, no one in the outside world is going to notice or care.
Who are the couple of big rebrands that you've done to date?
I'd say more of our business is rebrands than from scratch, truthfully, at this point. I think one that people really love is Supergoop, which again, it was not like a tear it all down and start from scratch, but it really was about helping them showcase that they were so much more than just a sunscreen brand, and that they really are one of the most innovative skincare and beauty brands in the world that happens to incorporate SPF in all their products, because of course, if you're taking care of your skin, that means you're protecting it from the sun. So that was a really exciting brand evolution. We were able to come in right when they had started a relationship with Sephora and really help them expand that relationship, expand the business, reach a whole new audience. You mentioned Levan Bakery before. That was another one, a beloved New York institution, local bakery. And there it was so important that it didn't feel like a corporate rebrand. It couldn't feel like all of a sudden Levan is like a chain, right? We really had to preserve that special neighborhood local feel while setting them up to expand to other markets and continue to grow. So there's always a unique set of considerations. And again, for us, it's about recognizing like something helped them get to the place where they are today. And we don't want to just, tear the whole thing down.
How does a creative team like yours use AI to move your campaigns forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, I'd say, I think that the technology is changing so rapidly that I would never pretend to say, like, here's how we use AI and we've got it all figured out and that's never going to change. Like, it is a constant work in progress of how we're incorporating AI into our workflows. But I think that any creative company would be foolish to think that you can ignore it. I think that at minimum, it's an incredible tool for sort of just speeding up iterations and being able to test out lots of ideas, as well as communicate those ideas. I mean, I think that we used to spend, hours, if not days, searching out like the correct reference in existing swipe photography just to convey to a client what's in our heads, and then have to go out and create the whole thing from scratch anyway. And now we can like very quickly use AI to communicate, hey, here's what we're thinking. That doesn't mean that the AI is going to be the final product that's out there in the world. It usually isn't, but it's just makes it much easier to convey a creative vision throughout the process. So I think there's a ton of applications for it. I think we're all, as an industry, just scratching the surface about exactly what it's going to mean. But at the end of the day, what enables me to fall asleep at night is that I really believe the only value in the work we do is comparative. It's not just about being great. You have to be better than your competition. And that's ultimately where the value is. So if everyone has access to these tools, then it's going to be about who's using the tools in a smarter way, who's finding a way to put like their unique stamp on it, because branding is a competitive exercise when you really think about why anybody invests in it.
JB, Emily mentioned competitors. If I were having an RFP tomorrow, and I'm definitely excited about Red Antler, who else am I meeting with in this process to figure out who's going to either build my brand or rebrand my brand?
So we get this question often. And the interesting thing is, because we're working across so many different scales of businesses, categories of businesses, types of work, because we're doing, new brands, brand evolutions, digital experiences, campaign work. It is such a vast spectrum of options that come up. And it also spans from an individual freelancer, a team doing it in-house, small agencies, huge global agencies. There is very little consistency that we come across. And oftentimes we don't even know who it is we're competing against. Who knows? Mixed bag.
Emily, is there a brand out there that you would love to help? You see it, you see where they're struggling. You say, if they came to me, we could really help them. Who would that be?
I am obsessed with early internet innovators who have not managed to stay as the most relevant brand. So I feel sad to say this. I don't want to offend anyone, but like an example of that would be OpenTable, which when OpenTable first launched, like it was so cool. It was like, oh my God, I can get a restaurant reservation online. I don't have to make a phone call. And then Resi came out and just like, no pun intended, ate their lunch. And now OpenTable, like they've launched notifications and I see they're doing their best, but like that is the kind of challenge that I would love to sink my teeth into is like, you were there first. You deserve to be the leader. Someone else has come in and just like completely surpassed you. Let's get your crown back.
JB, same question. Whose campaign would you love to pick up because you know you could put points on the board?
So I've been very impressed by how LinkedIn has become a content hub and the way that, businesses and people are sharing their voices through that platform. But I think from a brand perspective, it feels like it's time for a fresh take. I think there's a lot of good stuff there, but again, as like a leader who has pioneered and has such a massive market share, I think there's a chance to keep pushing ahead and avoid the case of the open table. Don't let there be a Resi.
All right, let's conclude with rapid fire. Are you ready?
We're ready.
Emily, first question to you. Favorite place to travel?
I love the beach. I've got a 6-year-old who loves the beach right now. We're all about beach vacations. I'm going to say Anguilla.
Nice. JB, you're at the beach, so I won't ask you that question because you're out there in Sag Harbor today.
Well, like chilly, but yeah.
Yeah, well, enjoy our world. Favorite streamed TV show?
It's a clear winner for me is Shogun, and I love both the historical immersion and perspective shift that provided and the fact that I had to intensely pay attention and stay off my phone, which was really refreshing.
Well, I think it did win all the Golden Globe Awards, much to the surprise.
It was a great show. Incredible production.
So good.
Emily, person you'd most like to meet?
This is a hard one. I'm going to say Jonathan Anderson, who's been the creative director of the fashion brand Loewe for over a decade, I'd say. I think he's now moving on, but I think he's an absolute creative genius and has just been such an original in an industry that I think often is looking sideways instead of forward. So I would love to know more about how he does it and what's in his brain and just absorb some genius.
JB, favorite brand right now?
I have a 13-month-old that doesn't sleep. And so my favorite brand, which is also a Red Antler client shout out, is Jot, ultra concentrated coffee that I would not be existing or as perky and coherent as I am on this podcast today without it.
And
I too am addicted to Jot. I'll just throw that out there.
I'm a very happy subscriber. Oh, you got to try it. It's incredible.
My God. It's the best, truly life-changing product.
Yeah. I'm a big coffee fan, and my at-home coffee use is 100% Jot. My recommendation would be iced with milk of your choice and just like a little bit of maple syrup. We're good to go.
Last question, and I want for each of you, if you weren't running Red Antler Habitat Partners, what would you be doing? Emily?
This is such a fun question for us because both of us have been doing this for like the absolute bulk of our adult lives. I would be a librarian. I love books.
What's a library? I don't even know what that is. Is there a library? They still have those?
They do, and it's incredibly important that we preserve them. And I love physical books. I love reading. I love helping people find a book that's right for them. And I think it would just be really peaceful and a nice midlife career shift.
JB?
For me, it is musician. When I first moved to New York, it was to play in an indie rock band. And music is a part of my life in other ways now, but if I wasn't doing this, I'd probably be picking up a guitar.
And with that, we'll land this flight of the retail pilot. JB, Emily, it's so good to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's flight of the retail pilot. And please give us a review on your favorite podcast platform.